Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests, and I've got some introductions first. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and to welcome to Saskatchewan and to our legislative building a delegation of interns from the Ontario Legislature Internship Program who are seated in the Speaker's Gallery. They're in Regina to take part in the Canadian Political Science Conference being held at the University of Regina and have taken time out to visit us today. Just give us a wave when I say your name. Daryl Gonsalves, Cassandra Lowen, Joseph Maytot, Anna Chara, and Harmeet Sandhu. Also attending with the interns is Dr. Peter Constantino, the academic director of the program. We had an opportunity to visit with them this afternoon, had some lunch. Great group here, very, very sharp. I ask all members to welcome our guests to Saskatchewan and to this legislature. Recognize the member for Melfort.
Ask leave for an extended introduction.
Member for Melfort is asked for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to introduce the good-looking crew of students and their teachers to their legislature in the West Gallery. We have 16 grade 5 and 6 students from Engelfeld School and their teacher Jolene Gulliker and Lorraine Kowalski, and their parent chaperones Albine Ostrovsky, Renee Osborne, and Lance Stockbrugger. So we appreciate them being here today. Also from St. Brew, we have 23 grade 7 students and their teacher Carlina Bullich and Tyra Thomas, and then their parent chaperone is Melanie Blandon. And I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, when I grew up, St. Brew and Engelfeld were small communities, and we've seen a lot of schools close over the years. And I just want to mention the courage and the hard work that a lot of the companies we have in these small communities do to keep the schools open. And I know Engelfeld has grown, and Borgo Industries and St. Brew, we've seen an addition onto that school. So we really appreciate the hard work of the companies, and we're glad to have the students in schools that are growing rather than closing, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Recognize a member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition, I'd like to join you in welcoming the Ontario legislative interns here to our legislature. I understand they're here to attend the Humanities Congress in the city, and we wish you a lot of enjoyment and learning from that program, but also here at the legislature. We had a great lunch, and I want to appreciate that opportunity to talk about Saskatchewan and share those insights. I just want to say how important interns are to the legislatures, and we sure hope that at some point we see our own Saskatchewan legislative internship return. These young people really highlight the contributions of what interns can bring to the legislature. With that, I'd ask all members to join me and welcome these folks to our legislature. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Yorkton.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to introduce someone in this Assembly who has been introduced before, but I believe needs to be introduced again in the West Gallery. Dr. Scott Francis. He's a good friend from White City. He's a doctorate in leadership. He is an author and also a first responder at White City, and again, a very good friend. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to welcome Scott to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to introduce a guest in the East Gallery who is no stranger to this House. It's Larry Hubick. He's the president of the Saskatchewan Federation of Labour, and he has a lot of respect from his colleagues because this is his 8th term, Mr. Speaker, as the president of the Saskatchewan Labour. So that is pretty impressive. Larry is a strong advocate for workers' rights, but not only that, he advocates for all Saskatchewan residents, and that's much to be admirable. So thank you, Larry. He also played a big role, Mr. Speaker, with assuring that Bill 40 was completely repealed, and I think that's important as well. And so we know that Larry isn't afraid to hold both sides of this House accountable, and we really appreciate that, and thank you for all the hard work you do in this province. So I ask that all members welcome Larry to his legislature. Thank you.
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the member opposite in welcoming Mr. Hubick to the legislature today. I recently made aware that he is currently the longest-serving president of any provincial federation of labour in Canada, as I am the longest-serving Minister of Labour Relations in Canada right now. And while we may not agree on everything, and we've certainly had some disagreements, I hear my colleague behind chirping that we'll ride off into the sunset together. The simple reality, Mr. Speaker, is one of the things that we do agree on is that we're both aging incredibly gracefully and have developed exceptional charm and wit as we get older. But on a more serious note, I want to thank him for being a colleague and a friend. His dedication to workplace safety and to the workers in our province is absolutely critical to how we go forward, and I regard him as a friend, and I understand he's indicated he's not going to be running again, and want to wish him well and ask him to stay in touch, Mr. Speaker.
As a member for Regina Rochdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and through you, seated in your gallery, my constituency assistant, Kelly Zazula. Kelly has been working within the constituency of first Regina Capel Valley and now Regina Rochdale for 10 years. And her dedication to the constituents in the riding is absolutely incredible. She is conscientious and always just goes to the wall to help everyone. So I appreciate her hard work and her dedication, because she makes my job easy. And some days, you know, we try to be everywhere and try and do everything, but Kelly makes it all happen. So I appreciate her dedication and her hard work, and I just want everyone here to welcome her to her Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Weyburn.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, seated in the West Gallery are two guests that I'd like to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Legislative Assembly. In fact, this is, I think, their second time visiting together. First, Gwen Wright from the City of Weyburn. Gwen is a longtime educator in the City of Weyburn. She is very active in the community. She's on the board of the Working Shop. She is, I believe, involved with Rotarian Club, with the Rotary Club, very involved with theatre in the City of Weyburn, and as well is very involved in her church, the Free Methodist Church of Weyburn, Mr. Speaker. And seated with her is my constituency assistant, Marcy Swedberg. Marcy has been the constituency assistant for 18 years, and just to show how good of a constituency assistant She is, Mr. Speaker, from my seat here. I wasn't sure of the number, and so with a series of hand signals, I was able to get the number of years that it's been. So it's been 18 years. Marcy worked for the previous MLA and for me for the last 12 years. Mr. Speaker, I think it's appropriate that I'm introducing Marcy the day after I introduced my mother in the Legislative Assembly, because Marcy certainly has become much more than just a constituency assistant in my life. She's a very much trusted and valued friend to me. And so I would just ask all members to help me in welcoming Gwen and Marcy to their Legislative Assembly.
Here, here. Well, we still have a half hour, you sure? Presenting petitions. Recognize the member for Lloydminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to rise today to present a petition from citizens who are opposed to the federal government's decision to impose a carbon tax on the province of Saskatchewan. I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action: to cause the government of Saskatchewan to take the necessary steps to stop the federal government from imposing a carbon tax on the province. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed by citizens of Lloydminster, Frenchman Butte, Paradise Hill, Turtleford, St. Walburg. I do so present.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition to get big money out of Saskatchewan politics. And the undersigned residents of the province want to bring to our attention the following: that Saskatchewan's outdated Election Act allows corporations, unions, and individuals, even those living outside the province, to make unlimited donations to our province's political parties. And we know that the people of Saskatchewan deserve to live in a fair province where all voices are equal and money can't influence politics. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that over the past 10 years, the Saskatchewan Party has received $12.61 million in corporate donations, and of that, $2.87 million come from companies outside of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan politics should belong to Saskatchewan people, and we know that the federal government and the provinces of Alberta, Manitoba, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and even British Columbia have moved to limit this influence and level the playing field by banning corporate and union donations to political parties. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the government of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party to overhaul Saskatchewan's campaign finance laws to end out-of-province donations, to put a ban on donations from corporations and unions, and to put a donation limit on individual donations. And Mr. Speaker, the people signing this petition today come from the cities of North Battleford and Swift Current. I do so present. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling on the government to restore the Saskatchewan Rental Housing Supplement. We know that this is an important amount of money that was being received, a marginal amount of money that was being received, but so crucial for keeping a head over the most vulnerable and keeping them off the streets, Mr. Speaker. These citizens wish to bring to your attention that rents remain unaffordably high for many since the cost of living has increased significantly in the last decade, while social services benefits have remained unchanged. I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to immediately restore the Saskatchewan Rental Housing Supplement. This particular petition, as we presented for a number of days here, Mr. Speaker, this particular petition is signed by individuals from Saskatoon today. I do so present.
Recognize the member for Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling for critical workplace supports for survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan has the very dubious distinction of having the highest rates of domestic violence amongst all the provinces in Canada, and we know we must do so much more to protect survivors of interpersonal violence. For many who experience that violence, the violence will follow them to the workplace, which is why the signatories to this petition are calling for 5 days of paid leave, and up to 17 weeks of unpaid leave be made available to workers who are survivors of domestic violence.
That's right.
And that critical workplace supports made available to survivors of domestic violence be also made available to workers living with PTSD as a result of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, that is what those who are on the front line of this crisis, those who are working with the survivors, are calling for. The YWCA of Regina and PASS are two examples of such organizations. This is also similar to what we saw in the government's own domestic violence death review report, where it spoke to the importance of ensuring that there are workplace supports for survivors of interpersonal violence. They all see the importance of ensuring that those who are fleeing situations of violence are able to maintain their employment so that they can have a steady income, so they can actually be able to transition away from places of violence. Mr. Speaker, this is what we've called for in our private members' bill, Bill number 609, the fourth time we put forward these provisions in the last 2 years. The time is limited for the government to pass this legislation. It's time for them to step up, do the right thing, and pass these provisions. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call upon the Sask Party government to pass legislation to ensure critical supports in the workplace, including reasonable accommodation and paid and unpaid leave for survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, the individuals signing the petition today come from Regina. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions. Statements by members. Recognize the member for Moose Jaw, Waccamaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to acknowledge May as Missing Children's Month in Saskatchewan. It is an opportunity to raise awareness by dispelling myths about missing persons, situations, profiling individual cases, highlighting agency supports within communities. Every year, about 4,500 missing persons reports are filed in the province. Most are runaway children and youth. Fortunately, the majority of these cases are solved within 48 hours thanks to the work of family, police, social services staff, community workers, and others. However, even one missing child is one too many. Our government takes this issue very seriously and has taken steps to provide a number of supports. The Ministry of Justice is a partner in the Provincial Partnership Committee on Missing Persons, along with members from Indigenous, police, and community agencies. They work to help prevent people from going missing, support a coordinated response when people do go missing, and provide services for victims' families. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry also provides annual funding to Child Find Saskatchewan and provided through its Criminal Property Forfeiture Funds support to the Missing Children Society of Canada. While these are positive steps, there is still a long ways to go. I ask all members of this Assembly in acknowledging May as Missing Children's Month. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On May 16th, I was pleased to attend the performing arts portion of the 3rd annual Riverside Aboriginal Arts Festival at the E.A. Rawlinson Centre in Prince Albert. The show featured jigging, drums, a rattle group, and Indigenous-themed songs. Mr. Speaker, the performers were from grade 1 to 8 at Riverside School. During the first week in June, the Riverside Aboriginal Arts Festival will display the visual art and creative writing portion of its showcase at the John B. Hicks Gallery in downtown Prince Albert. Riverside School is in my constituency, Mr. Speaker, with a high Indigenous population, and this festival celebrates their traditions and culture. I visit Riverside several times a year, and I'm always impressed with the staff and students at the school and all that they have accomplished. Mr. Speaker, I wish to extend my congratulations to the young performers and artists in this festival, and thank them for sharing their culture, traditions, and talent with us. It would be impossible to have this event without dedicated teachers, mentors, families, and sponsors. Thank you for each of them for making this festival a reality. Mr. Speaker, I ask that all members join with me in congratulating the participants and organizers of the Riverside Aboriginal Arts Festival.
I recognize the member for Yorkton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This past Saturday, people from Yorkton and area gathered at the Parkland Mall for the 21st annual Braid Not Braid Close Cuts for Cancer head shaving event. I was happy to take part this year in person after having to participate virtually last year via FaceTime from Yorkton's ICU after my own cancer surgery. What started in 1998 with friends and family morally supporting my four-year-old son and raising a few dollars for cancer research has evolved over 2 decades. It now funds cutting-edge research through the Saskatchewan Cancer Agency, as well as supports those fighting cancer through many local and provincial initiatives. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, Braden lost his battle shortly before the 3rd annual event, but our family was encouraged to just do it one more time in his memory. That was 18 events ago. Although my family continues to do this in memory of our Braden gone too soon, it now has everything to do with supporting patients and their families in their journey, having some fun while we do it, and raising dollars for very important initiatives. Close Cuts has raised $45,000 so far this year, and some significant satellite events are still to come. To date, Close Cuts has raised over $850,000. Honourable mention goes to City Councillor Aaron Keeley and his son Derek, 10 years old, who raised $16,000 and $2,000 respectively this year. We are so very thankful for all the corporate and private financial support, the participants, the volunteers. It just couldn't happen without them. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in thanking all those who help make Braden Ottenbury Close Cuts for Cancer a success each year, and to keep those affected by cancer in their prayers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Saskatchewan's heritage language teachers, students, and schools. On May 7th, I had the opportunity to once again to attend and speak at the annual Heritage Language Volunteer Teacher Awards Night, hosted by the Multilingual Association of Regina, MLAR. The member for Gardner Park also attended. The annual event is held to honor volunteer teachers who have committed themselves to the teaching of heritage languages and whose invaluable services have made an incredible difference within our community. MLAR is a non-profit and is committed to the retention and promotion of heritage languages in Regina. Mr. Speaker, language is the foundation of culture, thus a foundation of our multicultural province. Heritage language schools are established all across our province and are vital in supporting settlement in Saskatchewan and supporting the strength in our diversity. The very modest funding was cut a few years ago by the Sask Party government, but know that the official opposition, Saskatchewan New Democrats, will continue to work to restore that important funding, which represents an investment culturally, socially, and economically. I want to thank MLAR and its leadership and all of the teachers, schools, volunteer organizations, cultural associations, and supporters of heritage language within our province, and thank them for putting our province's motto, "From many people's strength into action." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Carrot River Valley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on June 25th, the Lieutenant Governor will be presenting 4 Junior Citizen of the Year awards to deserving youth from across the province. One of the recipients, Georgia Edwards, is a student at Hudson Bay Community School. The prestigious Junior Citizen of the Year program is sponsored by the Saskatchewan Weekly Newspaper Association in conjunction with SaskPower and the Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan. This program recognizes outstanding contributions by youth in the province and has been running for over 40 years now, Mr. Speaker. In April, the members of the Junior Citizen Selection Committee gathered at Government House in Regina with the task of narrowing down to over 120 nominations, or narrowing down the over 120 nominations down to just 4. Certain criteria must be fulfilled in order to become a recipient of this award, including having a positive lifestyle, dedicated to the community and school, have a strong sense of caring and responsibility, have the ability to overcome life's challenges, inspires others, and must be between the ages of 8 to 18. Georgia and the 3 other recipients will receive a $3,000 bursary towards their post-secondary education from SaskPower. Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan, W. Thomas Malloy, will present the awards at a ceremony at Government House in Regina on June 25th. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in congratulating Mrs. Georgia Edwards and being honored with the 2018 Junior Citizen of the Year Award. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Weyburn Big Muddy.
Mr. Speaker, in almost every community across Saskatchewan, the hub of activity in winter is the local rink. The Coliseum, now Crescent Point Place, is just that place for Weyburn. Mr. Speaker, teams, coaches, players, and parents come and go over the course of over 3 decades, but for the Coliseum, one person has been the constant, and that's been Myrna McFadden. Earlier this month, Myrna ended her 34-year stint as the operator of the concession booth, and she did it in the way that she started, surrounded by her family. Wearing a shirt proclaiming, "The legend has retired," she was greeted by friends and families at a come-and-go reception in the afternoon, and that evening, 170 attended a celebration in her honor. Rink burgers were on the menu. Starting September 1st of 1984, she has seen it all at the Crescent Point Place: an RBC Cup, an Esso National Championship, league championships, countless minor hockey games, and even an MMA event. Her celebration was all about family. It was her own kids that worked for her in the early days, and now it has been her grandkids working at her side. She has been serving food and drinks and candy to the kids of the kids that were her first customers, and she has really enjoyed getting to know the Weyburn Red Wings over those 30-plus years, knowing that for many of them, it was their first time living away from home. Mr. Speaker, later this summer, when hockey schools are in full swing, Myrna's not going to be there. Myrna and her kids will now have the time to fulfill her lifelong dream to travel to Memphis to visit Graceland. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask all members to join with me in congratulating Myrna and wishing her all the best in her retirement.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Westview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this past weekend, the Special Olympics Saskatchewan SaskTel Awards Banquet was held in Saskatoon. This event celebrates the great athletes, volunteers, supporters, sponsors, and many other individuals and organizations that provide these athletes with the opportunity to participate in sports, training, and competitions. These individuals allow the Special Olympic athletes to make lifelong friends and create lasting memories. Their recognition is much deserved. Mr. Speaker, I wish we had more time allotted to list all of the winners and nominees, as well as those significant accomplishments of all these individuals, as well as every one of them deserve their own recognition. Their incredible efforts have enabled Special Olympics Saskatchewan to achieve all of its success. Mr. Speaker, the Special Olympics athlete oath is, "Let me win. But if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt." These individuals exemplify the inspiring oath, not only through athletics, but through life in general. Each and every one of these athletes make their communities and province very proud for what they do both on and off the field. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of this entire Assembly, I want to congratulate all the award winners at the Special Olympics Saskatchewan SaskTel Awards Banquet, and thank all those involved in making this event a success. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Life has become less affordable for people in Saskatchewan, with prices rising faster in this province than anywhere else in the country. And Saskatchewan people are having to work harder than ever to make every dollar count. And it's hard to imagine what could be more out of line with that reality than this government's decision to keep paying Saskatchewan Party leadership candidate Alana Cook tens of thousands of dollars long after her failed bid for the Premier's chair has ended. Right. Yesterday we heard that this hand-picked head of the civil service has been back on the government payroll since the end of January and on a paid leave since the 6th of April. And based on answers from the Premier and estimates, that means she's been collecting more than $22,000 a month, over $40,000 so far. How does the Premier justify paying such a huge sum of money to this Sask Party insider when so many in our province are just barely scraping by?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I endeavoured yesterday to provide the information with respect to the wages since April the 6th is $38,000. Mr. Speaker, earlier today, the Cabinet of the Government of Saskatchewan approved an order in Council to cancel the appointment of Alana Cook as Deputy Minister effective June the 1st. We're currently in the process of negotiating a severance package with Ms. Cook, and she'll be treated like any other employee is treated within the public service in the province of Saskatchewan. There's a number of factors that are included when determining the appropriate level of severance, including the years of service, Mr. Speaker, as well as age. And the fact is this, Mr. Speaker, is Ms. Cook and the government have agreed that the last 2 months since she has been on paid leave will be accounted for in the final severance payout determination.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's not unprecedented for people to take an unpaid leave to run for office, but it's extremely unusual for someone to be placed on paid leave when they return to figure out their career path. If the Premier didn't want Alana Cook as his Deputy Minister, that's fine, but he should have dealt with this immediately when he came into office, not waiting until June 1st. But instead of a clean break, we've already paid tens of thousands of dollars to keep her on the payroll without any work whatsoever being done. Now, we've been told by the minister that the cafeteria workers in this building that's costing us $30,000 a year. Mr. Speaker, $30,000 is enough for them to make the decision to put those people out of work. But apparently $38,000 for no work at all from Alana Cook is acceptable to this government. So on top of this ongoing salary without duties, on top of this paid leave, how much are we going to be facing in severance for this person to have made the choice to go and run for the Sask Party leadership? How much are we going to be on the hook for while she took that break to explore her political options?
Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there's a number of inaccuracies in that question. The fact of the matter is I did disclose the amount here that has been paid since April the 6th. It's $38,000. But credit to Ms. Cook and the conversations that are going on. As I said, that Alana Cook and the government of Saskatchewan have agreed that time period, that when she'd return on paid leave, Mr. Speaker, will be included and accounted for in the final severance package that is put forward. These things take time, Mr. Speaker, to negotiate when someone negotiate a severance with someone that has served in the public service. Each and every situation is different, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue and endeavour to not negotiate the numbers or disclose the numbers here on the floor of the legislature, but we'll engage with Ms. Cook and ensure that Mr. Speaker, she is treated as anyone in the public services.
Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Lakeview.
Mr. Speaker, it's one thing to do the right thing and something completely other to only do the right thing after you get caught. We've been trying for weeks to get the Premier to remember the details of his meeting with Bill Boyd on his irrigation scheme. And let's remember, this is the irrigation scheme Bill Boyd was promoting in China that eventually led to him being found in breach of conflict of interest laws, the reason that he resigned from politics. Given the magnitude of this issue and Boyd's peppered history, it's more than passing strange that the Premier can't remember any details about this meeting. And now we're learning Boyd and his associate were also in contact with his right-hand man, William Wang, the top civil servant in charge of seeking Chinese investment. Exactly the kind of investment Bill Boyd went to China to promote. Top to bottom, Mr. Speaker, this whole thing stinks. What steps has the Premier taken to investigate what extent Bill Boyd used his connections in the civil service to pursue his own agenda in China?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A number of those questions have been asked and answered in this Assembly previous, so I will not. I'll not answer those questions again, Mr. Speaker, here today. But the fact of the matter is there's some legitimate concerns and questions that have been made regarding a member of the public service here just recently, and we take these questions very, very seriously, Mr. Speaker. As the government of Saskatchewan, it's my understanding that the Minister of Trade and Export has asked the Deputy Minister of Trade and Export to review these concerns. The fact of the matter is that the public service has very strong conflict of interest guidelines, and we expect that those guidelines will be adhered to.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member for Regina Lakeview.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, scrambling to do the right thing after they get caught. Let's remember that over the years, Saskatchewan taxpayers paid tens of thousands of dollars to fly Bill Boyd, Lori Pusher, and William Wang around the world. Ministerial travel records indicate that Boyd and Wang have traveled to China to, quote, build new relationships with those that are considering investment opportunities in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, that sounds an awful lot like Bill Boyd was doing in his follow-up trip to China, where he was found to have breached conflict of interest laws. The Conflict of Interest Commissioner's report said the scope of what he could investigate was limited. Neither Wang nor the Premier can find it in themselves to remember the details of their dealings with Bill Boyd in the period around this trip. Who knew what, when, as it relates to this China trip? It matters. Simply saying, I don't recall, simply does not cut it. Has the potential relationship between Boyd and his former officials been looked into? And if not, will the Premier commit to that today?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Trade.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the Premier had addressed that specific question in the previous answer. We expect public servants and we expect MLAs to adhere to conflict of interest guidelines. The former member from Kindersley was found to not have adhered to conflict of interest guidelines and was kicked out of this caucus, Mr. Speaker, as a result of that. There were legitimate questions that were raised regarding a member of the public service, Mr. Speaker. We take those questions seriously, and because of that, I spoke to my Deputy Minister this morning, and I asked if she would conduct a review with regard to these specific concerns. That is going to be going forward. The public service have very clear and very strong guidelines around conflict of interest, Mr. Speaker. We expect those guidelines to be followed and adhered to.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Recognize the member for Prince Albert Northcote.
This government's decision to slap the 6% PST on construction labour is hurting everyone in our province. But it's municipalities looking to upgrade facilities and maintain their infrastructure who are among the hardest hit. Adding the PST to construction labour adds thousands of dollars to the cost of maintaining our towns and cities. And in my community of Prince Albert, municipal leaders are speaking out. Councillor Don Cody said, quote, "This is harming our community without any question." And Mayor Greg Dion said yesterday that this decision, quote, "has killed our construction industry." Does the Minister of Finance realize that her government's decision to force municipalities to pay PST on construction labour is hurting municipalities and hurting people?
I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it's been over a year ago now when we had a budget, quite frankly, where we were shifting away from our reliance on resource revenue. The reason why was for 4 years our resource revenues have fallen by $1.2 billion. In order to have the services that we have within the province and to have the services that the people of the province expect, quite frankly, we need to find those revenues somewhere, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to run deficits year over year over year. We feel getting back to balance and being stable is extremely important. That involved difficult decisions, and one of those decisions is the one that the member opposite just mentioned, which was expanding the PST base. But, Mr. Speaker, we still have the lowest PST of all provinces that have PST within our country. We're among the lowest personal income tax within our country. We have the lowest corporate income tax, Mr. Speaker. We're among the lowest small business tax. We have the highest income threshold for small business, so we're still tax competitive, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Prince Albert Northcote.
When municipalities applied for infrastructure grants over the last few years, they did so under the impression that they wouldn't have to pay PST on their share of the project. But now that those projects are underway and the contractors need to be paid, municipalities are left holding the bag once again. It's just another example of this government downloading costs onto towns and cities, except this time the money goes back to the provincial government. It's not fair. Will the Sask Party do the right thing for workers, for jobs, and for our municipalities? Will they scrap their 6% PST on construction labour?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's kind of interesting. I've had a conversation, as has the Minister of Government Relations, with SARM and SUMA on this particular issue, and they have been advised for any specific case where there was a project that was already approved and underway that got caught in this gap to please bring it forward. We would look at it case by case. To our knowledge, none have come forward. So if the member opposite knows of such a construction that was underway, by all means, we're more than happy to look at it, and she can bring that forward to us to work on. But, Mr. Speaker, again, What is the NDP plan in order to make up for this gap? The resource revenue is still down $1.2 billion. They want more spending in health care. They want more spending in education. They want more spending in social issues.
Recognize the Minister.
Heard one economic plan coming from the members opposite other than a carbon tax. And quite frankly, if they want to talk about what's going to hurt the people and the municipalities within the province, let's just talk about a carbon tax.
Recognize the member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Mr. Speaker, the federal government created an extended parental leave that allows for parents to take up to a year and a half off work to be with their children. But families in Saskatchewan can't access these benefits because the Sask Party government has failed to change the Saskatchewan Employment Act. We asked the Sask Party government to make this change, but they won't commit. Mr. Speaker, it is an easy fix to bring the provincial legislation in line with that of the federal government is offering. Alberta and Ontario has already done it, and it is a common sense approach. So will the Minister of Labour commit to making this change to the legislation and stop blocking Saskatchewan families from extended parental leave?
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last number of years, the federal government has increased employment insurance benefits to include a number of different leaves. In each and every case when that's happened, this government has required employers to provide the additional time off for that. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite raises another one with extended maternity leave benefits, parental leave benefits, and Mr. Speaker, if the simple answer to her question is yes, we will be doing it in the fall session.
Recognize the member for Athabasca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Saskatchewan Party loves to sink endless amounts of taxpayers' cash and dollars into their mega projects. $2 billion into CCS, $2 billion on the Regina bypass, and over $50 million and counting on the Bill Boyd smart meters. Part of the government's excuse for the smart meter fiasco was sinking soil. Well, I guess that's what happens when you hand out large government contracts to out-of-country companies who don't have a clue about the realities of Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan people had to foot the bill to clean up the smart meter mess after, and I quote, unexpected weather events, end quote. But Mr. Speaker, as bad as Bill Boyd's smart meters were, the Saskatchewan Party's $2 billion Regina bypass is even more concerning. And we know the people of Balgony have had concerns about the project. To the Minister, have there been any issues with the bypass and sinking ground issues?
Recognize the Minister of Highways.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nicole. Thank you. You bypassed right around the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We'll have a little order, thanks. Let him actually start to answer. Recognize the Minister of Highways.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of the Regina Bypass project, and we're very proud of what's happened on the east side of the city of Regina, Mr. Speaker. This is a good news story for those communities out there. They're growing, they're thriving. But the big thing is safety, Mr. Speaker. And even the community of Balgony, we've met with the community of Balgony. They're happy with the bypass, their overpass that we've done for them. We've worked with them. In fact, quoting the fire chief from White City, Mr. Speaker, when he says that now they can't remember the last time the jaws of life have been brought out to the east side of the city, Mr. Speaker. It's first and foremost, it's about safety, and it is safety that we have delivered to the people on the east side of the city of Regina, and we will see those communities grow as a result of it, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Recognize a member for Athabasca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Saskatoon bypass seems an awful lot like the Regina bypass, which now would potentially carry a price tag that has ballooned to $2 billion. The Regina bypass has come under fire from the provincial auditor and is subject to dozens of lawsuits costing millions of dollars. This session, the Highways Minister rolled into the rotunda to clear the air, and I quote, "It's no different than what we did on the Regina bypass," end quote. Well, Mr. Speaker, that is scary stuff for taxpayers. To the Minister, are you planning on handing out another multi-billion-dollar P3 deal to an out-of-country company like Vinci for the Saskatoon bypass? Or will you build it traditionally, keep the profits in Saskatchewan, and give the work to Saskatchewan companies and workers?
Recognize the Minister of Highways.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Saskatoon Freeway or Expressway, whatever we want to call it, isn't even on the radar screen yet, Mr. Speaker. We have narrowed the scope of where the expressway would go. We've worked with the municipalities up there, with the City of Saskatoon and the Armor-Corman Park, and we've narrowed that scope for them to continue development. Yes, the process hasn't changed as far as what we did. The timing of the process has changed, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we've done, and that was a recommendation from the auditor, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we wrap up the session and head back home to our constituency for the summer months, I'm looking forward to engaging with people and my riding in Saskatoon Centre and working to bring their voices and their concerns back to this Assembly. But, Mr. Speaker, we know that some members of this House have won nominations to run federally and will be dedicating much of their time to federal politics. Now, that's a real shame, Mr. Speaker, because our job this summer is to represent and listen to Saskatchewan people, not to be out in the stumps stumping for Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives. Mr. Speaker, does the Sask Party see anything wrong with this? Do they agree with me that we need to change our laws so that MLAs can't get paid to campaign for federal parties? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Minister of Trade.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That sounded a bit like a party question to me, but I can assure members of this House, and I know members on this side of the aisle will be working very hard for their constituents, Mr. Speaker. They're going to be going back to their ridings. They're going to be doing the exact same. Yeah, right. This is the member from Athabasca says, yeah, right, Mr. Speaker.
The one that crossed the floor.
I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, we take at face value. We take at face value.
Order. Let's keep our questions concerned with government business. Let's keep our answers concerned with government business. I recognize Minister of Trade.
Look, Mr. Speaker, we take at face value the honourable intentions of members on both that side and this side of the House. We know members are going to be doing their job. We know members are going to be working hard for their constituents, whatever side of the House they're on. And, Mr. Speaker, we could raise questions about the intentions of some of the members on that side as well, about what their future plans may be, Mr. Speaker, who may not be very happy with the leadership provided by the Leader of the Opposition. I'm not going to do that, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to point out any individual members, Mr. Speaker, but, members are going to be doing their job over the summer.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Saskatchewan expect their MLAs, who are paid with taxpayers' dollars, are working for them instead of campaigning for the Conservatives. The voices.
Business questions, please.
Legislative Assembly Act. So with that in mind, we want to make sure the voices and concerns of people are brought back in the fall. But we see a situation where that may not be a situation in Saskatoon, Eastview, and Regina Wallshakers. They may not make it back here. And to me, Mr. Speaker, that's not okay. So will the ministers opposite make changes to the Legislative Assembly Act to ensure that those who are running in federal elections can't also be sitting MLAs.
Recognize Minister of Trade.
All summer. Well, Mr. Speaker, members on both sides of the aisle, this side I can speak to particularly, are going to continue to do their jobs over the course of the summer. Unless the member knows of by-elections that are going to be called federally, these members are going to be continuing to do their work, as did John Solomon when he was a nominated candidate for federal office on that side of the House, Mr. Speaker. Seems that when New Democrats are running federally, Mr. Speaker, that seems to be fine, but not the case on this side of the House. What I would say, Mr. Speaker, without equivocation, is that members are going to work hard, members are going to do their job, members are going to be representing their constituents to the best of their ability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As a member for Regina, Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it takes a lot to be surprised by the Sask Party's approach to the public service. Indeed, they've had it out for the public servants since they first formed government, cutting 15% of the entire civil service, then wanting to take $250 million out of public servants' pockets. And now it's that Premier's promise to pay for his campaign promises by cutting 1,250 Crown and government jobs. But nothing shows the true colours of this government quite like how they treat the hardest working, lowest paid employees of the public service. Last year it was firing 230 cleaners and then having them apply back for their old jobs at 2/3 the money. Now they are geared up to fire the hard-working men and women of the legislative cafeteria, and at what is an incredibly difficult time for the leadership of that kitchen. It isn't too late for this government to change course and to do the right thing. Will they show some heart and scrap these callous cuts?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Essential Services.
Thank you very much for the question. These questions were posed in committee a number of weeks ago, and I'm happy to answer them. We value, make no mistake, we value the good work that is done by every member of the public service in Saskatchewan, and certainly we reflect that in our dealings with them. We reflect that in honouring negotiations that take place. We want to also make sure that the operational efficiency of the government of Saskatchewan continues, and in light of the operations of the cafeteria, we're looking at all options and to go forward to ensure, again, that taxpayers' dollars are spent very carefully so they can be used to employ public service, so they can be used for healthcare, education, and social services that are the priorities of this government. That's what has happened since day one with this government, and that's what will continue, and it'll be done with respect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this government had more than $20,000 a month to pay Alana Cook while they finalized her severance. And I'm sure that won't be a small number. But when it comes to the legislative cafeteria, the Sask Party goes super hawk and sets about firing them without any real warning or chance to make up a shortfall that is a fraction of what this Sask Party government happily forks over to Sask Party pals and insiders, Mr. Speaker. It's not right. The tender that government has put out closes tomorrow. So there is still time for this government to get their priorities straight and to do right by the hardworking men and women who have done so much for all of us over the years. Will the minister, will that premier do the right thing and pull that tender before it's too late?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Central Services.
Thank you very much. Whether it's Ms. Cook as a public servant, or whether it's the employees that are part of the cafeteria, or any other employee in the public service of Saskatchewan, they can certainly know that they will be dealt with in a fair manner. What we're talking about here certainly is the expenses and the operational efficiency of the cafeteria. We've gone out to the private sector and others to ask for their ideas on how to operate it more efficiently. Members opposite know that the cafeteria is operated at a deficit in the neighbourhood of $40,000 per year, and we feel that it is incumbent upon us to look at all options and to treat everyone fairly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills.
Item number 1, Ms. Rancourt.
Recognize the member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill number 610, the Saskatchewan Employment Extended Parental Leave Amendment Act 2018, be now introduced and read a first time.
It has been moved by the member for Prince Albert Northcote that Bill number 610, the Saskatchewan Employment Extended Parental Leave Amendment Act 2018, be now introduced and read a first time. It's a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
First reading this bill.
When shall this bill be read a second time? Recognize the member.
Next sitting of the Assembly.
Next sitting. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Orders of the day.
Government motions. The Honourable Mr. Duncan.
Stand.
Government orders. Committee of Finance.
I do now leave the chair for the Committee of Finance.
Okay. Tell them to be quiet. The business before the committee are appropriation resolutions. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
I move the following resolution. Resolved that toward making good the supply granted to Her Majesty on account of certain charges and expenses of the public service for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2018, the sum of $142,623,000 be granted out of the General Revenue Fund.
The Minister of Finance has moved resolution number 1. Resolved that making good the supply granted to Her Majesty on account of certain... Oh, I better have this first. Okay. Resolution number 1, resolved that making good the supply granted to Her Majesty on the account of certain charges and expenses of the public service for the fiscal year ending March 31, 2018, the sum of $142,623,000 be granted out of the General Revenue Fund. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion? Carried. So I sign it here, right? I recognize the Minister of Finance.
I move the following resolution. Resolved that toward making good the supply granted to Her Majesty on account of certain charges and expenses of the public service for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2019, the sum of $12,982,271,000 be granted out of the General Revenue Fund.
The Minister of Finance has moved resolution number 2, resolved that towards making good the supply granted to Her Majesty on the account of certain charges and expenses of the public service for the fiscal year ending March 31, 2019, the sum of $12,982,271,000 be granted out of the General Revenue Fund. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the resolution? Carried. There being no further business before the committee, I invite a member to move that the committee rise, report progress, and ask for leave to sit again. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Chair, I move that the committee rise, report progress, and ask for leave to sit again.
It has been moved by the Government House Leader that the committee rise, report progress, and ask for leave to sit again. Is that agreed? Carried.
recognize the chair of committees.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of Finance has agreed to certain resolutions, has instructed me to report the same, and asked for leave to sit again.
When shall the resolution be read the first time?
Read a first and second time.
Is the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
Second reading of the resolutions.
Shall the committee sit again? Recognize Minister of Finance. Sorry, next sitting.
Next sitting, Mr. Speaker.
Next sitting. Pursuant to Rule 32 sub 1, the Minister of Finance shall move first reading of the appropriation bill. I recognize the Minister of Finance.
I move that Bill number 131, the Appropriation Act 2018 number 2, be now introduced and read a first time.
Minister of Finance has moved that Bill number 131, the Appropriation Act 2018 sub number 2, be now introduced and read the first time. Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
First reading of this bill.
I recognize Minister of Finance.
Pursuant to Rule 32(1)(e), I move that Bill number 131, the Appropriation Act 2018 number 2, be now read a second and third time.
Minister of Finance has moved second and third reading of Bill number 131, the Appropriation Act 2018 number 2. It's a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Second and third reading of this bill.
I'm advised that His Honor, the Lieutenant Governor, is here for royal assent. All please rise.
Pray be seated.
May it please Your Honor, this Legislative Assembly at its present session has passed several bills which in the name of the Assembly I present to Your Honor and to which bills I respectfully request Your Honor's assent.
Your Honor, the bills are as follows. Bill number 85, the Reclaimed Industrial Sites Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 129, the Saskatchewan Technology Startup Incentive Act. Bill number 107, the Provincial Emblems and Honours Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 90, the Heritage Property Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 91, the Snowmobile Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 123, the Snowmobile Fees Amendment Act 2018. Bill number 81, the Traffic Safety Miscellaneous Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 88, the Automobile Accident Insurance Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 86, the Child and Family Services Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 124, the Environmental Management and Protection Environmental Handling Charges Amendment Act 2018. Bill number 127, the Income Tax Amendment Act 2018. Bill number 128, the Provincial Sales Tax Amendment Act 2018. Bill number 110, the Animal Protection Act 2017. Bill number 83, the Environmental Management and Protection Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 125, the Saskatchewan Value-Added Agriculture Incentive Act. Bill number 126, the Energy Export Act. Bill number 89, the School Choice Protection Act. Bill number 92, the Saskatchewan Telecommunications Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 93, the Saskatchewan Telecommunications Holding Corporation Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 73, the Insurance Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 99, the Interpretation Amendment Act 2017, number 2. Bill number 103, the Land Contracts Actions Act 2017. Bill number 106, the Missing Persons and Presumption of Death Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 111, the Municipal Tax Sharing Potash Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 113, the Planning and Development Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 76, the Parks Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 115, the Residential Tenancies Amendment Act 2017. Bill number 121, the Cannabis Control Saskatchewan Act. Bill number 122, the Cannabis Control Saskatchewan Consequential Amendments Act 2018. Bill number 114, the Vehicles for Hire Act. Bill number 112, the Miscellaneous Vehicle and Driving Statutes Cannabis Legislation Amendment Act 2017. And Bill number 82, the Sask Energy Amendment Act 2017.
In Her Majesty's name, I assent to these bills.
May it please your honor, this Legislative Assembly has voted the supplies required to enable the government to defray the expenses of the public service. In the name of the Assembly, I present to your honor Bill number 131, the Appropriation Act 2018, number 2, to which bill I respectfully request your honor's assent.
In Her Majesty's name, I thank the Legislative Assembly, accept their benevolence, and assent to this bill.
Please be seated. Recognize the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move this House do now adjourn.
No one House leaders move to adjourn this House. Pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.